They say the kindest people are the easiest to love. But what if the kindest people are also the ones who quietly disappear? What if the ones who say, "It's okay, don't worry about me," are not at peace, but afraid of being too much? There is a silent pattern that rarely gets named, a quiet habit of shrinking, of apologizing for existing, of rehearsing messages and deleting them, of carrying heavy emotions alone because asking for support feels like an intrusion. You don't want to bother anyone. You don't want to take up space. You don't want to be a burden. But somewhere along the way, being considerate turned into self-erasure. Why does your need feel heavier than everyone else's? Why does your voice tremble when you finally decide to speak? And why does independence feel safer than intimacy? This is not just kindness, it is psychology. And today, gently, without judgment, we'll explore it. Let's begin.
Here is a certain elegance in the way you make yourself smaller. You say, "It's fine." You say, "Don't worry about it." You say, "I can handle it." And most people believe you. This chapter explores the quiet choreography of shrinking, the subtle ways you reduce your presence so no one feels inconvenienced. It reveals how over-apologizing, minimizing needs, and hesitating before asking for help can look like maturity, but often grow from something far more fragile. Here, the pattern is gently named, not as a flaw, but as a learned survival skill. You hesitate before sending a message. You rewrite it 3 times. You add a softener, a smiley face, an apology that wasn't necessary. Because what if they're busy? What if you interrupt something important? What if your need weighs more than you realize? So you carry it yourself. At first, it feels noble, responsible, considerate. You become the low-maintenance one, the easy one, the one who never asks for much. But slowly, something else begins to happen. Your emotions start to feel like contraband, like luggage too heavy to place on someone else's shoulders. You begin filtering even your joy, afraid of overwhelming, even your sadness, afraid of complicating. And the more you shrink, the more invisible you become. Not because people don't care, but because you trained them not to notice. You taught the world that you are fine, that you don't need reassurance, that silence means strength. Yet inside, there is a quiet erosion. Like a river wearing down its own banks, you chip away at yourself in small, socially acceptable ways. You downplay the headache, you swallow the disappointment, you wait until you are alone to feel fully. And the strange part? You would never want someone you love to do the same. If they apologized for crying, you would hold them closer. If they said, "I don't want to bother you," you would insist they weren't. But when it is you, the rules change. Why? Somewhere deep within, there is an unspoken belief. My needs are heavier than other people's. My presence requires justification. So you perfect the art of disappearing in plain sight, smiling, agreeing, adjusting. And over time, you forget what it feels like to take up space without guilt. This is not weakness. It is adaptation. But adaptation to what?
No one wakes up one morning and decides to become invisible. This pattern has roots, quiet ones, often buried beneath memories that don't look traumatic at first glance. This chapter explores the origins, the early environments where being low maintenance felt safer than being fully expressed. It gently examines how childhood conditioning, subtle emotional neglect, or unpredictable reactions can teach someone that love is something you preserve by asking for less. Perhaps you grew up in a home where emotions were inconvenient, not abusive, not chaotic in obvious ways, just crowded. Busy parents, stressed caregivers, an atmosphere where practicality mattered more than feelings. Maybe when you cried, you were told, "It's not a big deal." When you were excited, someone responded with distraction. When you needed comfort, you sensed hesitation. No one explicitly said, "Don't be a burden," but you felt it in the air, like humidity before a storm. Children are intuitive. They scan faces, they measure tone, they learn quickly which emotions are welcomed and which ones tightened the room. So you adjusted. You became observant, careful, self-sufficient beyond your years. You learned that being easy earned praise, that independence brought approval, that quiet resilience felt safer than messy need. And if there was tension in the household, illness, financial strain, emotional distance, you may have decided, silently, I will not add to this. It felt mature, even loving. But here is the subtle truth. When a child consistently minimizes their own needs to protect the emotional climate, something internal shifts. The nervous system links expression with risk. Needing becomes dangerous. Asking becomes exposure. Over time, this adaptation hardens into identity. You're the strong one, the understanding one, the one who never complains. And it feels good, at first, because approval feels like safety, and safety feels like love. But beneath that identity is a small, unspoken question. If I stop being easy, will I still be loved? That question rarely leaves. It simply grows quieter, settling into the background like sediment at the bottom of a river. In adulthood, the environments change, the people change, but the internal rule remains. Do not distark, do not overwhelm, do not require too much. Even when no one is asking you to shrink anymore, you still do. Because once survival strategies are formed, they don't dissolve just because the danger is gone. They wait, they whisper, they protect. But protect you from what?
You tell yourself it's just your personality. You're independent, private, low maintenance. But what if your body is still guarding a door that no one is trying to open? This chapter explores the science beneath the silence, how the nervous system learns to associate need with danger, and how attachment patterns quietly shape the fear of bothering others. What feels like politeness may actually be protection. The human brain is wired for connection. From infancy, survival depends on being seen, heard, responded to. But when responses are inconsistent, dismissive, or emotionally distant, something subtle happens. The nervous system adapts. It begins scanning for signs of inconvenience, a delayed reply, a sigh, a distracted tone. To someone else, these are neutral moments. To you, they register as warning signals. Because long ago, your system learned, when I need too much, connection becomes unstable. So your body chooses the safer option. Self-reliance. Psychology calls this an attachment adaptation. When closeness feels unpredictable, the mind creates distance before rejection can occur. It is not coldness, it is self-protection. You may crave intimacy deeply, but the moment you consider asking for reassurance, your chest tightens, your thoughts race, your heart whispers, don't risk it. This is not dramatic, it is biological. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, does not differentiate between a childhood emotional dismissal and an adult delayed text. It simply detects patterns. It remembers past pain. It activates caution. And caution feels like shrinking. Hyper-independence often looks like strength. But beneath it is a nervous system that equates vulnerability with exposure. Asking for help triggers the same circuitry as stepping onto unstable ground. So you stabilize yourself instead. You soothe yourself. You rationalize your own sadness. You convince yourself you don't really need comfort. And each time you override your need, the brain reinforces the pattern. See, you survived alone. But surviving is not the same as connecting. And here lies the quiet paradox. The more you suppress your need for reassurance, the more your nervous system remains vigilant. Because true safety isn't found in isolation. It is found in mutual regulation, in being held, understood, responded to. Yet your body hasn't fully learned that. It still guards, still anticipates inconvenience, still whispers, stay small, it's safer.
And so you continue to move through relationships like someone tiptoeing across fragile glass. Careful, measured, contained. But how long can a heart live in containment before it begins to ache?
There's a quiet battle happening inside you. One part longs to be held. The other part fears being heavy. This chapter explores the internal conflict between craving closeness and resisting it, the exhaustion of pretending to be easy, and the resentment that slowly forms when needs remain unmet. Beneath the calm surface, something simmers. You tell yourself you don't need much, but when you see others being reassured effortlessly, when you watch someone express frustration without apology, something stirs inside you. Not jealousy, not exactly, more like a quiet ache. Because you have learned to translate your needs before they leave your mouth. You pre-edit, you soften, you dilute. By the time your feelings reach someone else, they are already half-sized. And then when the response feels minimal, you say, "It's fine." But inside, there is a flicker, a small flare of disappointment. You wanted them to notice without you asking. You wanted them to sense it. You wanted proof that you matter without needing to declare it. And when that doesn't happen, the ache deepens. Here is the tension. You desire closeness, but you fear the cost of requesting it. So you wait. You hope someone will lean in. You hope someone will insist. You hope someone will say, "Tell me what's really going on." But when they don't, not because they don't care, but because you've trained them to believe you're okay, resentment quietly accumulates like pressure beneath a volcano. It doesn't explode outward. It implodes. You withdraw slightly. You become quieter. You tell yourself you shouldn't expect so much. And then guilt appears. They're trying. I shouldn't need this. I'm being dramatic. So the volcano seals itself again. This tug of war is exhausting. One side whispers, "Let someone in." The other replies, "Don't be too much." And so you hover in between, close, but not fully visible, connected, but not fully known. It's like standing at the edge of a river, thirsty, yet afraid to step in because the current might be too strong. You convince yourself that stability is enough, that being steady is enough, that longing is indulgent. But the human heart is not designed for half connection. It craves reciprocity, witnessing, mutual emotional weight. When those needs remain unspoken, they don't disappear. They compress, and compressed emotion doesn't vanish. It waits. The question is not whether you have needs. The question is how long you can continue negotiating against yourself.
Being low maintenance sounds admirable. It sounds mature, self-contained, effortless to love. This chapter explores the hidden cost of that identity, how constantly appearing self-sufficient can slowly distort relationships, create imbalance, and deepen loneliness. Strength, when misunderstood, can become invisibility. At first, people appreciate your ease. You don't demand constant reassurance. You don't create conflict. You adapt. And because you adapt so well, others begin to rely on that steadiness. They assume you're fine. They assume you don't need checking in. They assume silence means stability. Not out of neglect, but because you've made it look that way. The paradox is subtle. The more capable you appear, the less people feel the urgency to care for you. So attention flows toward the louder needs in the room, toward the crises, toward the openly expressed pain, and you remain composed. But composure can become camouflage. Over time, a strange loneliness forms, not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being unseen. You are present in relationships, yet partially hidden, known for your reliability, but not for your vulnerability. People admire your strength, but who tends to your softness? There is another cost, quieter still. When you consistently minimize your needs, you teach others how to treat you, not intentionally, not consciously, but patterns form. If you never say you're hurt, others assume nothing hurts you. If you never ask for reassurance, they assume you don't crave it. If you always adjust, they expect you to continue adjusting. And slowly, imbalance feels normal. You give more emotional labor than you receive. You listen deeply but share lightly. You hold space without asking for it in return. At first, this feels generous. Then, gradually, it feels heavy. Like carrying water in an empty well, pouring and pouring, yet never fully replenished. There may come moments when you feel unexpectedly tired, irritated without clear cause, detached from people you once felt close to. It's not that you stopped caring. It's that parts of you were never invited to the table. And here is the most painful realization. Sometimes people don't see you, not because they wouldn't care, but because you never showed them where you needed care. The identity of low maintenance protected you once, but now it may be costing you intimacy, and intimacy requires visibility. The question becomes, what happens when strength is no longer armor, but barrier?
There comes a moment, quiet, almost unremarkable, when something inside you shifts. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a subtle crack in the armor. This chapter explores the turning point, the realization that never bothering anyone has slowly meant never fully being known. It is the moment when self-protection begins to feel heavier than vulnerability. Maybe it happens during a simple conversation. Someone says, "You never tell me when you're struggling." And instead of dismissing it, something lands. Or maybe it happens in solitude, after another day of carrying everything alone. You feel the fatigue not just in your body, but in your spirit. The exhaustion of always being the stable one. And a question surfaces. When do I get to lean? This realization doesn't come with blame, it comes with clarity. You begin to see the pattern, the rehearsed messages, the swallowed confessions, the automatic "I'm fine." You recognize that your silence wasn't strength, it was strategy. A strategy that once kept you safe. But safety and fulfillment are not the same. You may notice something else too. The people around you are not as fragile as you imagined. Some might actually want to know. Some might feel closer when you open up. But letting them see you feels unfamiliar. Your voice trembles the first time you admit, "Actually, I've been having a hard time." Your heart races when you don't immediately soften it with a joke, because taking up space feels like stepping into bright light after years in the shade. Exposed, visible, uncertain. And yet, something surprising happens. The world doesn't collapse. The relationship doesn't end. In some cases, connection deepens. In others, you may discover that certain dynamics were built on your silence, and that can be painful to confront. Not everyone will know how to meet you when you change the script. But this is part of the awakening. You begin to understand that asking for support is not the same as demanding it. Expressing emotion is not the same as burdening someone. Needs are not moral failures. They are human. The realization is gentle, but profound. You were never too much. You were simply afraid of being too much. And that fear shaped your behavior. Now the question shifts from, how do I avoid bothering others, to something quieter, more radical. What would it feel like to let myself exist fully?
Taking up space does not begin with grand declarations. It begins with a pause. This chapter explores integration, not transformation into someone louder or different, but a slow rebalancing. It is about redefining kindness to include yourself and allowing visibility to coexist with gentleness. You don't suddenly become expressive overnight. You begin with small rebellions, leaving a message unsweetened by apology, saying, "I actually need help with this," admitting you felt hurt without immediately minimizing it. Each act feels disproportionate at first. Your mind whispers, "You're overdoing it." Your body tightens, waiting for rejection. But when rejection doesn't arrive, something inside you recalibrates, like a nervous system slowly learning that the ground is stable. Taking up space isn't about becoming demanding. It's about allowing your inner landscape to be witnessed. You begin noticing how often you pre-edit yourself, the joke you almost made, the opinion you softened, the fatigue you concealed. And instead of erasing them, you let them remain, not aggressively, not performatively, simply honestly. You realize that consideration does not require self-erasure. Kindness toward others is beautiful, but kindness that excludes you becomes imbalance. There is a quiet dignity in saying, "This matters to me," not as accusation, not as complaint, but as truth. You may feel awkward at first. Vulnerability, when unfamiliar, feels like standing in open air without armor. But armor was never meant to be permanent. It was meant for storms. And you are not in the same storm anymore. something else begins to happen too. When you express your needs gently and clearly, the right people lean in. They respond. They adjust. And you notice that intimacy feels warmer when it's mutual. No more guessing games. No more silent tests. No more hoping someone reads between lines you never wrote. You begin to understand that being easy is not the same as being authentic. Authenticity may ripple the surface. It may create moments of discomfort, but it also creates depth. And depth is where real connection lives. You don't lose your softness. You don't lose your thoughtfulness. You simply stop abandoning yourself to preserve it. Taking up space is not expansion into dominance. It is returning to your natural size. And that return is quiet, steady, real.
There is something profoundly tender about realizing you were never a burden, only afraid of being one. This final chapter is not about dramatic change. It is about soft return. I return to the parts of you that learned to whisper instead of speak. I return to the needs that were labeled too much before they were ever understood. For so long, you equated worth with convenience. You believed love was safest when you required little, when you adjusted quickly, when you absorbed discomfort silently. But humans are not meant to be frictionless. You are not a guest in your own relationships. You are not an interruption. You are not excess weight someone must carry. You are presence. And presence, by nature, takes up space. The river does not apologize for flowing. The sky does not shrink to avoid overwhelming the horizon. Why then did you learn that your emotions must be folded small? Perhaps because shrinking once protected you. Perhaps because invisibility once kept the peace. Perhaps because being easy once felt like the surest path to love. But love that requires disappearance is not intimacy. Real intimacy breathes. It allows complexity. It welcomes both steadiness and need. There will still be moments when your instinct is to say, "It's fine." Moments when your fingers hover over the delete button. Moments when asking feels dangerous. That doesn't mean you failed. It simply means you are unlearning something that took years to build. And unlearning is gentle work. As you allow yourself to exist more fully, to express, to request, to reveal, you may notice something surprising. The right connections don't weaken, they deepen. Because being known is the opposite of being a burden. Being known is being human. You do not have to become louder. You do not have to become someone else. You only have to stop editing your existence. And that is enough. If this reflection made you feel seen, if parts of this felt quietly familiar, if something inside you softened while listening, you are not alone in this pattern. Many people learn to survive by becoming smaller, by becoming easy, by becoming the one who never asks for much. There is nothing broken about you. There is only a nervous system that tried to protect you the best way it knew how. If you'd like to stay connected, this channel is simply a space where we explore the hidden corners of the human heart, gently, thoughtfully, without judgment. And if you feel comfortable, you're welcome to share your experience in the comments, not because you have to, but because your words might help someone else realize they are not the only one who learned to shrink. You deserve relationships where you can exist fully. You deserve to be supported. You deserve gentleness. Take care of yourself.